Section 18 of Hard Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Debra, Lynn. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Book 3, Chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3. Very Decided. The indefatigable Mrs. Sparsit, with a violent cold upon her, her voice reduced to a whisper, and her stately frame so racked by continual sneezes that it seemed in danger of dismemberment, gave chase to her patron until she found him in the metropolis, and there, majestically sweeping in upon him at his hotel in St. James's Street, exploded the combustibles with which she was charged, and blew up. Having executed her mission with infinite relish, this high-minded woman then fainted away on Mr. Bounderby's coat collar. Mr. Bounderby's first procedure was to shake Mrs. Sparsit off, and leave her to progress as she might through various stages of suffering on the floor. He next had recourse to the administration of potent restoratives, such as screwing the patient's thumbs, smiting her hands, abundantly watering her face, and inserting salt in her mouth. When these attentions had recovered her, which they speedily did, he hustled her into a fast train without offering any other refreshment, and carried her back to Coketown more dead than alive. Regarded as a classical ruin, Mrs. Sparsit was an interesting spectacle on her arrival at her journey's end, but considered in any other light, the amount of damage she had by that time sustained was excessive, and impaired her claims to admiration. Utterly heedless of the wear and tear of her clothes and constitution, and adamant to her pathetic sneezes, Mr. Bounderby immediately crammed her into a coach and bore her off to Stone Lodge. "Now, Tom Gradgrind," said Bounderby, bursting into his father-in-law's room late at night, "here's a lady here, Mrs. Sparsit, you know Mrs. Sparsit, who has something to say to you that will strike you dumb." "You have missed my letter!" exclaimed Mr. Gradgrind, surprised by the apparition. "Missed your letters, sir!" bawled Bounderby. "The present time is no time for letters. No man shall talk to Josiah Bounderby of Coketown about letters with his mind in the state it's in now." "Bounderby," said Mr. Gradgrind, in a tone of temperate remonstrance, "I speak of a very special letter I have written to you in reference to Louisa." "Tom Gradgrind," replied Bounderby, knocking the flat of his hand several times with great vehemence on the table, "I speak of a very special messenger that has come to me in reference to Louisa. Mrs. Sparsit, ma'am, stand forward." That unfortunate lady, hereupon essaying to offer testimony, without any voice, and with painful gestures expressive of an inflamed throat, became so aggravating, and underwent so many facial contortions, that Mr. Bounderby, unable to bear it, seized her by the arm and shook her. "If you can't get it out, ma'am," said Bounderby, "leave me to get it out. This is not a time for a lady, however highly connected, to be totally inaudible and seemingly swallowing marbles. Tom Gradgrind, Mrs. Sparsit latterly found herself by accident in a situation to overhear a conversation out of doors between your daughter and your precious gentleman friend, Mr. James Harthouse." "Indeed!" said Mr. Gradgrind. "Ah, indeed!" cried Bounderby. "And in that conversation—" "It is not necessary to repeat its tenor, Bounderby. I know what passed." "You do?" "Perhaps," said Bounderby, staring with all his might at his so quiet and assuasive father-in-law, "you know where your daughter is at the present time?" "Undoubtedly. She is here." "Here!" "My dear Bounderby, let me beg you to restrain these loud outbreaks on all accounts. Louisa is here. The moment she could detach herself from that interview with the person of whom you speak, and whom I deeply regret to have been the means of introducing to you, Louisa hurried here for protection. I myself had not been at home many hours when I received her, here, in this room. She hurried by the train to town. She ran from town to this house through a raging storm, and presented herself before me in a state of distraction. Of course she has remained here ever since. Let me entreat you, for your own sake and for hers, to be more quiet." Mr. Bounderby silently gazed about him for some moments, in every direction except Mrs. Sparsit's direction, and then, abruptly turning upon the niece of Lady Scadgers, said to that wretched woman, "Now, ma'am, we shall be happy to hear any little apology you may think proper to offer for going about the country at express pace, with no other luggage than a cock and a bull, ma'am." "Sir," whispered Mrs. Sparsit, "my nerves are at present too much shaken, and my health is at present too much impaired in your service, to admit of my doing more than taking refuge in tears." Which she did. "Well, ma'am," said Bounderby, "without making any observation to you that may not be made with propriety to a woman of good family, what I have got to add to that is, that there is something else in which it appears to me you may take refuge, namely a coach; and the coach in which we came here being at the door, you'll allow me to hand you down to it, and pack you home to the Bank, where the best course for you to pursue will be to put your feet into the hottest water you can bear, and take a glass of scalding rum and butter after you get into bed." With these words, Mr. Bounderby extended his right hand to the weeping lady, and escorted her to the conveyance in question, shedding many plaintive sneezes by the way. He soon returned alone. "Now, as you showed me in your face, Tom Gradgrind, that you wanted to speak to me," he resumed, "here I am. But I am not in a very agreeable state, I tell you plainly, not relishing this business, even as it is, and not considering that I am at any time as dutifully and submissively treated by your daughter as Josiah Bounderby of Coketown ought to be treated by his wife. You have your opinion, I dare say, and I have mine, I know. If you mean to say anything to me tonight that goes against this candid remark, you had better let it alone." Mr. Gradgrind, it will be observed, being much softened, Mr. Bounderby took particular pains to harden himself at all points. It was his amiable nature. "My dear Bounderby," Mr. Gradgrind began in reply. "Now, you'll excuse me," said Bounderby, "but I don't want to be too dear. That to start with. When I begin to be dear to a man, I generally find that his intention is to come over me. I am not speaking to you politely, but as you are aware, I am not polite. If you like politeness, you know where to get it. You have your gentleman friends, you know, and they'll serve you with as much of the article as you want. I don't keep it myself." "Bounderby," urged Mr. Gradgrind, "we are all liable to mistakes." "I thought you couldn't make 'em," interrupted Bounderby. "Perhaps I thought so. But I say we are all liable to mistakes, and I should feel sensible of your delicacy, and grateful for it, if you would spare me these references to Harthouse. I shall not associate him in our conversation with your intimacy and encouragement. Pray do not persist in connecting him with mine." "I never mentioned his name," said Bounderby. "Well, well," returned Mr. Gradgrind, with a patient, even a submissive air, and he sat for a little while pondering. "Bounderby, I see reason to doubt whether we have ever quite understood Louisa." "Who do you mean by we?" "Let me say I, then," he returned, in answer to the coarsely blurted question. "I doubt whether I have understood Louisa. I doubt whether I have been quite right in the manner of her education." "There you hit it," returned Bounderby. "There I agree with you. You have found it out at last, have you? Education! I'll tell you what education is. To be tumbled out of doors, neck and crop, and put upon the shortest allowance of everything except blows. That's what I call education." "I think your good sense will perceive," Mr. Gradgrind remonstrated, in all humility, "that whatever the merits of such a system may be, it would be difficult of general application to girls." "I don't see it at all, sir," returned the obstinate Bounderby. "Well," sighed Mr. Gradgrind, "we will not enter into the question. I assure you I have no desire to be controversial. I seek to repair what is amiss, if I possibly can, and I hope you will assist me in a good spirit, Bounderby, for I have been very much distressed." "I don't understand you yet," said Bounderby, with determined obstinacy, "and therefore I won't make any promises." "In the course of a few hours, my dear Bounderby," Mr. Gradgrind proceeded, in the same depressed and propitiatory manner, "I appear to myself to have become better informed as to Louisa's character than in previous years. The enlightenment has been painfully forced upon me, and the discovery is not mine. I think there are Bounderby, you will be surprised to hear me say this. I think there are qualities in Louisa which have been harshly neglected and a little perverted, and I would suggest to you that if you would kindly meet me in a timely endeavor to leave her to her better nature for a while, and to encourage it to develop itself by tenderness and consideration, it would be the better for the happiness of all of us. Louisa, said Mr. Gradgrind, shading his face with his hand, has always been my favourite child. The blusterous Bounderby crimsoned and swelled to such an extent on hearing these words that he seemed to be, and probably was, on the brink of a fit. With his very ears a bright purple, shot with crimson, he pent up his indignation, however, and said, "You'd like to keep her here for a time?" I had intended to recommend, my dear Bounderby, that you should allow Louisa to remain here on a visit, and be attended by Sissy, I mean, of course, Cecilia Jupe, who understands her, and in whom she trusts. I gather from all this, Tom Gradgrind, said Bounderby, standing up with his hands in his pockets, that you are of opinion that there's what people call some incompatibility between Lou Bounderby and myself. I fear there is at present a general incompatibility between Louisa and almost all the relations in which I have placed her, was her father's sorrowful reply. Now look you here, Tom Gradgrind, said Bounderby the flushed, confronting him with his legs wide apart, his hands deeper in his pockets, and his hair like a hayfield wherein his windy anger was boisterous. You have said your say. I am going to say mine. I am a Coketown man. I am Josiah Bounderby of Coketown. I know the bricks of this town, and I know the works of this town, and I know the chimneys of this town, and I know the smoke of this town, and I know the hands of this town. I know 'em all pretty well. They're real. When a man tells me anything about imaginative qualities, I always tell that man, whoever he is, that I know what he means. He means turtle soup and venison with a gold spoon, and that he wants to be set up with a coach and six. That's what your daughter wants. Since you are of opinion that she ought to have what she wants, I recommend you to provide it for her, because, Tom Gradgrind, she will never have it from me. Bounderby, said Mr. Gradgrind, I hoped, after my entreaty, you would have taken a different tone. Just wait a bit, retorted Bounderby. You have said your say, I believe. I heard you out. Hear me out, if you please. Don't make yourself a spectacle of unfairness as well as inconsistency, because, although I am sorry to see Tom Gradgrind reduced to his present position, I should be doubly sorry to see him brought so low as that. Now, there's an incompatibility of some sort or another, I am given to understand by you, between your daughter and me. I'll give you to understand, in reply to that there unquestionably is an incompatibility of the first magnitude, to be summed up in this, that your daughter don't properly know her husband's merits, and is not impressed with such a sense as would become her, by George, of the honour of his alliance. That's plain speaking, I hope. Bounderby, urged Mr. Gradgrind, this is unreasonable. Is it? Said Bounderby. I am glad to hear you say so, because when Tom Gradgrind, with his new lights, tells me that what I say is unreasonable, I am convinced at once it must be devilish sensible. With your permission, I am going on. You know my origin, and you know that for a good many years of my life I didn't want a shoeing horn, in consequence of not having a shoe. Yet you may believe or not, as you think proper, that there are ladies, born ladies, belonging to families, who next to worship the ground I walk on. He discharged this like a rocket at his father-in-law's head. Whereas your daughter, proceeded Bounderby, is far from being a born lady, that you know yourself. Not that I care a pinch of candle snuff about such things, for you are very well aware I don't, but that such is the fact, and you, Tom Gradgrind, can't change it. Why do I say this? Not, I fear, observed Mr. Gradgrind in a low voice, to spare me. Hear me out, said Bounderby, and refrain from cutting in till your turn comes round. I say this because highly connected females have been astonished to see the way in which your daughter has conducted herself, and to witness her insensibility. They have wondered how I have suffered it, and I wonder myself now, and I won't suffer it. Bounderby, returned Mr. Gradgrind, rising, the less we say to-night the better, I think. On the contrary, Tom Gradgrind, the more we say tonight, the better, I think. That is," the consideration checked him, "till I have said all I mean to say, and then I don't care how soon we stop. I come to a question that may shorten the business. What do you mean by the proposal you made just now?" "What do I mean, Bounderby?" "By your visiting proposition," said Bounderby, with an inflexible jerk of the hayfield. "I mean that I hope you may be induced to arrange in a friendly manner for allowing Louisa a period of repose and reflection here, which may tend to a gradual alteration for the better in many respects." "To a softening down of your ideas of the incompatibility," said Bounderby. "If you put it in those terms." "What made you think of this?" said Bounderby. "I have already said, I fear Louisa has not been understood. Is it asking too much, Bounderby, that you, so far her elder, should aid in trying to set her right? You have accepted a great charge of her, for better, for worse, for—" Mr. Bounderby may have been annoyed by the repetition of his own words to Stephen Blackpool, but he cut the quotation short with an angry start. "Come," said he, "I don't want to be told about that. I know what I took her for as well as you do. Never you mind what I took her for. That's my lookout." "I was merely going on to remark, Bounderby, that we may all be more or less in the wrong, not even excepting you, and that some yielding on your part, remembering the trust you have accepted, may not only be an act of true kindness, but perhaps a debt incurred towards Louisa." "I think differently," blustered Bounderby. "I am going to finish this business according to my own opinions. Now I don't want to make a quarrel of it with you, Tom Gradgrind. To tell you the truth, I don't think it would be worthy of my reputation to quarrel on such a subject. As to your gentleman friend, he may take himself off wherever he likes best. If he falls in my way, I shall tell him my mind. If he don't fall in my way, I shan't, for it won't be worth my while to do it. As to your daughter, whom I made Lou Bounderby, and might have done better by leaving Lou Gradgrind, if she don't come home to-morrow by 12 o'clock at noon, I shall understand that she prefers to stay away, and I shall send her wearing apparel and so forth over here, and you'll take charge of her for the future. What I shall say to people in general of the incompatibility that led to my so laying down the law will be this: I am Josiah Bounderby, and I had my bringing up. She's the daughter of Tom Gradgrind, and she had her bringing up, and the two horses wouldn't pull together. I am pretty well known to be rather an uncommon man, I believe, and most people will understand fast enough that it must be a woman rather out of the common, also, who in the long run would come up to my mark." "Let me seriously entreat you to reconsider this, Bounderby," urged Mr. Gradgrind, "before you commit yourself to such a decision." "I always come to a decision," said Bounderby, tossing his hat on, "and whatever I do at once. I should be surprised at Tom Gradgrind's addressing such a remark to Josiah Bounderby of Coketown, knowing what he knows of him, if I could be surprised by anything Tom Gradgrind did, after his making himself a party to sentimental humbug. I have given you my decision, and I have got no more to say. Good night." So Mr. Bounderby went home to his town house to bed. At 5 minutes past 12 o'clock next day, he directed Mrs. Bounderby's property to be carefully packed up and sent to Tom Gradgrind's, advertised his country retreat for sale by private contract, and resumed a bachelor life. Chapter 4. Lost. The robbery at the bank had not languished before, and did not cease to occupy a front place in the attention of the principal of that establishment now. In boastful proof of his promptitude and activity as a remarkable man, and a self-made man, and a commercial wonder more admirable than Venus, who had risen out of the mud instead of the sea, he liked to show how little his domestic affairs abated his business ardour. Consequently, in the first few weeks of his resumed bachelorhood, he even advanced upon his usual display of bustle, and every day made such a rout in renewing his investigations into the robbery, that the officers who had it in hand almost wished it had never been committed. They were at fault too, and off the scent. Although they had been so quiet since the first outbreak of the matter that most people really did suppose it to have been abandoned as hopeless, nothing new occurred. No implicated man or woman took untimely courage or made a self-betraying step. More remarkable yet, Stephen Blackpool could not be heard of, and the mysterious old woman remained a mystery. Things having come to this pass, and showing no latent signs of stirring beyond it, the upshot of Mr. Bounderby's investigations was that he resolved to hazard a bold burst. He drew up a placard offering £20 reward for the apprehension of Stephen Blackpool, suspected of complicity in the robbery of Coketown Bank on such a night. He described the said Stephen Blackpool by dress, complexion, estimated height, and manner, as minutely as he could. He recited how he had left the town, and in what direction he had been last seen going. He had the whole printed in great black letters on a staring broadsheet, and he caused the walls to be posted with it in the dead of night, so that it should strike upon the sight of the whole population at one blow. The factory bells had need to ring their loudest that morning to disperse the groups of workers who stood in the tardy daybreak, collected round the placards, devouring them with eager eyes. Not the least eager of the eyes assembled were the eyes of those who could not read. These people, as they listened to the friendly voice that read aloud, there was always some such ready to help them, stared at the characters which meant so much with a vague awe and respect that would have been half ludicrous if any aspect of public ignorance could ever be otherwise than threatening and full of evil. Many ears and eyes were busy with a vision of the matter of these placards, among turning spindles, rattling looms, and whirling wheels for hours afterwards, and when the hands cleared out again into the streets, there were still as many readers as before. Slackbridge, the delegate, had to address his audience too that night, and Slackbridge had obtained a clean bill from the printer and had brought it in his pocket. "O my friends and fellow countrymen, the downtrodden operatives of Coketown, O my fellow brothers and fellow workmen and fellow citizens and fellow men," what a to-do was there when Slackbridge unfolded what he called that damning document, and held it up to the gaze and for the execration of the working man community. "O my fellow men, behold of what a traitor in the camp of those great spirits who are enrolled upon the holy scroll of justice and of union is appropriately capable. O my prostrate friends, with the galling yoke of tyrants on your necks, and the iron foot of despotism treading down your fallen forms into the dust of the earth, upon which right glad would your oppressors be to see you creeping on your bellies all the days of your lives, like the serpent in the garden. O my brothers, and shall I as a man not add, my sisters too, what do you say now of Stephen Blackpool, with a slight stoop in his shoulders and about 5'7" in height, as set forth in this degrading and disgusting document, this blighting bill, this pernicious placard, this abominable advertisement, and with what majesty of denouncement will you crush the viper who would bring this stain and shame upon the godlike race that happily has cast him out forever? Yes, my compatriots, happily cast him out and sent him forth. For you remember how he stood here before you on this platform. You remember how, face to face and foot to foot, I pursued him through all his intricate windings. You remember how he sneaked and slunk and sidled and splitted of straws, until, with not an inch of ground to which to cling, I hurled him out from amongst us, an object for the undying finger of scorn to point at, and for the avenging fire of every free and thinking mind to scorch and scar. And now, my friends, my labouring friends, for I rejoice and triumph in that stigma, my friends, whose hard but honest beds are made in toil, and whose scanty but independent pots are boiled in hardship, and now, I say, my friends, what appellation has that dastard craven taken to himself, when, with the mask torn from his features, he stands before us in all his native deformity? A what? A thief, a plunderer, a proscribed fugitive with a price upon his head, a fester and a wound upon the noble character of the Coketown operative. Therefore, my band of brothers, in a sacred bond, to which your children and your children's children yet unborn have set their infant hands and seals, I propose to you, on the part of the United Aggregate Tribunal, ever watchful for your welfare, ever zealous for your benefit, that this meeting does resolve, that Stephen Blackpool, weaver, referred to in this placard, having been already solemnly disowned by the community of Coketown hands, the same are free from the shame of his misdeeds, and cannot, as a class, be reproached with his dishonest actions. Thus Slackbridge, gnashing and perspiring after a prodigious sort. A few stern voices called out, "No!" and a score or two hailed, with assenting cries of "Hear, hear!" the caution from one man: "Slackbridge, you're overheader in't. You're a-going too fast." But these were pygmies against an army. The general assemblage subscribed to the gospel according to Slackbridge, and gave 3 cheers for him, as he sat demonstratively panting at them. These men and women were yet in the streets, passing quietly to their homes, when Sissy, who had been called away from Louisa some minutes before, returned. "Who is it?" asked Louisa. "It is Mr. Bounderby," said Sissy, timid of the name, "and your brother, Mr. Tom, and a young woman who says her name is Rachel, and that you know her. What do they want, Sissy dear?" "They want to see you. Rachel has been crying, and seems angry." "Father," said Louisa, for he was present, "I cannot refuse to see them, for a reason that will explain itself. Shall they come in here?" As he answered in the affirmative, Sissy went away to bring them. She reappeared with them directly. Tom was last, and remained standing in the obscurest part of the room, near the door. "Mrs. Bounderby," said her husband, entering with a cool nod, "I don't disturb you, I hope. This is an unseasonable hour, but here is a young woman who has been making statements which render my visit necessary. Tom Gradgrind, as your son, young Tom, refuses for some obstinate reason or other to say anything at all about those statements, good or bad, I am obliged to confront her with your daughter." "You have seen me once before, young lady," said Rachel, standing in front of Louisa. Tom coughed. "You have seen me, young lady," repeated Rachel, as she did not answer, "once before." Tom coughed again. "I have." Rachel cast her eyes proudly towards Mr. Bounderby, and said, "Will you make it known, young lady, where, and who was there?" "I went to the house where Stephen Blackpool lodged on the night of his discharge from his work, and I saw you there. He was there too, and an old woman who did not speak, and whom I could scarcely see, stood in a dark corner. My brother was with me." "Why couldn't you say so, young Tom?" demanded Bounderby. "I promised my sister I wouldn't," which Louisa hastily confirmed. "And besides," said the whelp bitterly, "she tells her own story so precious well, and so full, that what business had I to take it out of her mouth?" "Say, young lady, if you please," pursued Rachel, "why, in an evil hour, you ever came to Stephen's that night." "I felt compassion for him," said Louisa, her colour deepening, "and I wished to know what he was going to do, and wished to offer him assistance." "Thank you, ma'am," said Bounderby, "much flattered and obliged." "Did you offer him," asked Rachel, "a bank note?" "Yes, but he refused it, and would only take £2 in gold." Rachel cast her eyes towards Mr. Bounderby again. "Oh, certainly," said Bounderby. "If you put the question whether your ridiculous and improbable account was true or not, I am bound to say it's confirmed." "Young lady," said Rachel, "Stephen Blackpool is now named as a thief in public print all over this town, and where else. There have been a meeting to-night, where he have been spoken of in the same shameful way. Stephen, the honestest lad, the truest lad, the best—" Her indignation failed her, and she broke off sobbing. "I am very, very sorry," said Louisa. "Oh, young lady," returned Rachel, "I hope you may be, but I don't know. I can't say what you may ha' done. The like of you don't know us, don't care for us, don't belong to us. I am not sure why you may ha' come that night. Can't tell but what you may ha' come with some aim of your own, not minding to what trouble you brought such as the poor lad. I said then, bless you for coming, and I said it of my heart, you seemed to take so pitifully to him. But I don't know now, I don't know." Louisa could not reproach her for her unjust suspicions. She was so faithful to her idea of the man, and so afflicted. "And when I think," said Rachel through her sobs, "that the poor lad was so grateful, thinking you so good to him, when I mind that he put his hand over his hard-working face to hide the tears that you brought up there, oh, I hope you may be sorry, and ha' no bad cause to be it, but I don't know, I don't know." "You're a pretty article," growled the whelp, moving uneasily in his dark corner, "to come here with these precious imputations. You ought to be bundled out for not knowing how to behave yourself, and you would be by rights." She said nothing in reply, and her low weeping was the only sound that was heard until Mr. Bounderby spoke. "Come," said he, "you know what you have engaged to do. You had better give your mind to that, not this." "'Deed, I am loath," returned Rachel, drying her eyes, "that any here should see me like this, but I won't be seen so again. Young lady, when I had read what's put in print of Stephen, and what has just as much truth in it as if it had been put in print of you, I went straight to the bank to say I knew where Stephen was, and to give a sure and certain promise that he should be here in 2 days. I couldn't meet with Mr. Bounderby then, and your brother sent me away, and I tried to find you, but you was not to be found, and I went back to work. Soon as I come out of the mill to-night, I hastened to hear what was said of Stephen, for I know wi' pride he will come back to shame it. And then I went again to seek Mr. Bounderby, and I found him, and I told him every word I knew, and he believed no word I said, and brought me here." "So far that's true enough," assented Mr. Bounderby, with his hands in his pockets and his hat on. "But I have known you people before to-day, you'll observe, and I know you never dive for want of talking. Now I recommend you not so much to mind talking just now as doing. You have undertaken to do something. All I remark upon that at present is, do it." "I have written to Stephen by the post that went out this afternoon, as I have written to him once before sin he went away," said Rachel, "and he will be here, at furthest, in 2 days." "Then I'll tell you something. You are not aware, perhaps," retorted Mr. Bounderby, "that you yourself have been looked after now and then, not being considered quite free from suspicion in this business, on account of most people being judged according to the company they keep. The post office hasn't forgotten either. What I'll tell you is, that no letter to Stephen Blackpool has ever got into it. Therefore, what has become of yours I leave you to guess. Perhaps you're mistaken, and never wrote any." "He hadn't been gone from here, young lady," said Rachel, turning appealingly to Louisa, "as much as a week, when he sent me the only letter I have had from him, saying that he was forced to seek work in another name." "Oh, by George!" cried Bounderby, shaking his head with a whistle. "He changes his name, does he? That's rather unlucky, too, for such an immaculate chap. It's considered a little suspicious in courts of justice, I believe, when an innocent happens to have many names." "What," said Rachel, with the tears in her eyes again, "what, young lady, in the name of mercy, was left the poor lad to do? The masters against him on one hand, the men against him on the other. He only wanting to work hard in peace, and do what he felt right. Can a man have no soul of his own, no mind of his own? Must he go wrong all through with this side, or must he go wrong all through with that, or else be hunted like a hare?" "Indeed, indeed, I pity him from my heart," returned Louisa, "and I hope that he will clear himself." "You need have no fear of that, young lady. He is sure." "All the surer, I suppose," said Mr. Bounderby, "for your refusing to tell where he is, eh?" "He shall not, through any act of mine, come back with the unmerited reproach of being brought back. He shall come back of his own accord to clear himself, and put all those that have injured his good character, and he not here for its defence, to shame. I have told him what has been done against him," said Rachel, throwing off all distrust as a rock throws off the sea, "and he will be here, at furthest, in 2 days. Notwithstanding which," added Mr. Bounderby, "if he can be laid hold of any sooner, he shall have an earlier opportunity of clearing himself. As to you, I have nothing against you. What you came and told me turns out to be true, and I have given you the means of proving it to be true, and there's an end of it. I wish you good night, all. I must be off to look a little further into this." Tom came out of his corner when Mr. Bounderby moved with him, kept close to him, and went away with him. The only parting salutation of which he delivered himself was a sulky "Good night, father." With a brief speech and a scowl at his sister, he left the house. Since his sheet anchor had come home, Mr. Gradgrind had been sparing of speech. He still sat silent, when Louisa mildly said, Rachel, you will not distrust me one day when you know me better." "It goes against me," Rachel answered in a gentler manner, "to mistrust anyone. But when I am so mistrusted, when we all are, I cannot keep such things quite out of my mind. I ask your pardon for having done you an injury. I don't think what I said now. Yet I might come to think it again with a poor lad so wronged." "Did you tell him in your letter," inquired Sissy, "that suspicion seemed to have fallen upon him because he had been seen about the bank at night? He would then know what he would have to explain on coming back, and would be ready." "Yes, dear," she returned, "but I can't guess what can have ever taken him there. He never used to go there. It was never in his way. His way was the same as mine, and not near it." Sissy had already been at her side, asking her where she lived, and whether she might come tomorrow night to inquire if there were news of him. "I doubt," said Rachel, "if he can be here till next day." "Then I will come next night too," said Sissy. When Rachel, assenting to this, was gone, Mr. Gradgrind lifted up his head and said to his daughter, "Louisa, my dear, I have never, that I know of, seen this man. Do you believe him to be implicated?" "I think I have believed it, father, though with great difficulty. I do not believe it now." "That is to say, you once persuaded yourself to believe it, from knowing him to be suspected. His appearance and manner, are they so honest?" "Very honest." "And her confidence not to be shaken. I ask myself," said Mr. Gradgrind, musing, "does the real culprit know of these accusations? Where is he? Who is he?" His hair had latterly began to change its colour. As he leaned upon his hand again, looking grey and old, Louisa, with a face of fear and pity, hurriedly went over to him, and sat close at his side. Her eyes, by accident, met Sissy's at the moment. Sissy flushed and started, and Louisa put her finger on her lip. Next night, when Sissy returned home and told Louisa that Stephen was not come, she told it in a whisper. Next night again, when she came home with the same account, and added that he had not been heard of, she spoke in the same low, frightened tone. From the moment of that interchange of looks they never uttered his name, or any reference to him, aloud, nor ever pursued the subject of the robbery when Mr. Gradgrind spoke of it. The 2 appointed days ran out. 3 days and nights ran out, and Stephen Blackpool was not come, and remained unheard of. On the 4th day, Rachel, with unabated confidence, but considering her dispatch to have miscarried, went up to the bank, and showed her letter from him with his address at a working colony, one of many, not upon the main road, 60 miles away. Messengers were sent to that place, and the whole town looked for Stephen to be brought in next day. During this whole time the whelp moved about with Mr. Bounderby like his shadow, assisting in all the proceedings. He was greatly excited, horribly fevered, bit his nails down to the quick, spoke in a hard, rattling voice, and with lips that were black and burnt up. At the hour when the suspected man was looked for, the whelp was at the station, offering to wager that he had made off before the arrival of those who were sent in quest of him, and that he would not appear. The whelp was right. The messengers returned alone. Rachel's letter had gone. Rachel's letter had been delivered. Stephen Blackpool had decamped in that same hour, and no soul knew more of him. The only doubt in Coketown was, whether Rachel had written in good faith, believing that he really would come back, or warning him to fly. On this point opinion was divided. 6 days, 7 days, far on into another week, the wretched whelp plucked up a ghastly courage, and began to grow defiant. Was the suspected fellow the thief? A pretty question. If not, where was the man, and why did he not come back? Where was the man, and why did he not come back? In the dead of night the echoes of his own words, which had rolled heaven knows how far away in the daytime, came back instead, and abided by him until morning. End of section 18.
Section 19 of Hard Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomsen. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Section 19, Book 3, Chapter 5. Found. Day and night again. Day and night again. No Stephen Blackpool. Where was the man, and why did he not come back? Every night Sissy went to Rachel's lodging and sat with her in her small neat room. All day Rachel toiled, as such people must toil, whatever their anxieties. The smoke serpents were indifferent who was lost or found, who turned out bad or good. The melancholy mad elephants, like the hard fact men, abated nothing of their set routine whatever happened. Day and night again, day and night again, the monotony was unbroken. Even Stephen Blackpool's disappearance was falling into the general way and becoming as monotonous a wonder as any piece of machinery in Coketown. "I misdoubt," said Rachel, "if there is as many as 20 left in all this place who have any trust in the poor dear lad now." She said it to Sissy as they sat in her lodging, lighted only by the lamp at the street corner. Sissy had come there when it was already dark, to await her return from work, and they had since sat at the window where Rachel had found her, wanting no brighter light to shine on their sorrowful talk. "If it hadn't been mercifully brought about that I was to have you to speak to," pursued Rachel, "times are when I think my mind would not have kept right. But I get hope and strength through you. And you believe that though appearances may rise against him, he'll be proved clear?" "I do believe so," returned Sissy, "with my whole heart. I feel so certain, Rachel, that the confidence you hold in yours against all discouragement is not like to be wrong, that I have no more doubt of him than if I had known him through as many years of trial as you have. And I, my dear," said Rachel, with a tremble in her voice, "have known him through them all, to be, according to his quiet ways, so faithful to everything honest and good, that if he was never to be heard of more, and I was to live to be 100 years old, I could say with my last breath, God knows my heart, I've never once left trusting Stephen Blackpool." "We all believe up at the lodge, Rachel, that he'll be freed from suspicion sooner or later." "The better I know it to be so believe there, my dear," said Rachel, "and the kinder I feel it that you come away from there purposely to comfort me, and keep me company, and be seen with me, when I'm not yet free from all suspicion myself, the more grieved I am that I should ever have spoken those mistrusting words to the young lady. And yet—" "You don't mistrust her now, Rachel?" "Now that you've brought us more together, no. But I can't at all times keep out of my mind." Her voice so sunk into a low and slow communing with herself that Sissy, sitting by her side, was obliged to listen with attention. "I can't at all times keep out of my mind mistrustings of someone. I can't think who 'tis, I can't think how or why it may be done, but I mistrust that someone has put Stephen out of the way. I mistrust that by his coming back of his own accord, and showing himself innocent before them all, someone would be confounded, who, to prevent that, has stopped him and put him out of the way." "That is a dreadful thought," said Sissy, turning pale. "It is a dreadful thought, to think he may be murdered." Sissy shuddered, and turned paler yet. "When it makes its way into my mind, dear," said Rachel, "and it will come sometimes, though I do all I can to keep it out, with counting on to high numbers as I work, and saying over and over again pieces that I knew when I were a child, I fall into such a wild, hot hurry that however tired I am, I want to walk fast, miles and miles. I must get the better of this before bedtime. I'll walk home with you." "He might fall ill upon the journey back," said Sissy faintly, offering a worn-out scrap of hope, "and in such a case There are many places on the road where he might stop, but he is in none of them. He has been sought for in all, and he's not there." "True," was Cissy's reluctant admission. "He'd walked the journey in 2 days. If he was footsore and couldn't walk, I sent him in the letter he got the money to ride, lest he should have none of his own to spare. Let us hope that tomorrow will bring something better, Rachel. Come into the air." Her gentle hand adjusted Rachel's shawl upon her shining black hair in the usual manner of her wearing it, and they went out. The night being fine, little knots of hands were here and there lingering at street corners, but it was supper time with the greater part of them, and there were but few people in the streets. "You're not so hurried now, Rachel, and your hand is cooler. I get better, dear, if I can only walk and breathe a little fresh. Times when I can't, I turn weak and confused. But you must not begin to fear, Rachel, for you may be wanted at any time to stand by Stephen. Tomorrow is Saturday. If no news comes tomorrow, let us walk in the country on Sunday morning and strengthen you for another week. Will you go?" "Yes, dear." They were by this time in the street where Mr. Bounderby's house stood. The way to Cissy's destination led them past the door, and they were going straight towards it. Some train had newly arrived in Coketown, which had put a number of vehicles in motion, and scattered a considerable bustle about the town. Several coaches were rattling before them, and behind them as they approached, Mr. Bounderby's, and one of the latter drew up with such briskness, as they were in the act of passing the house, that they looked round involuntarily. The bright gaslight of Mr. Bounderby's steps showed them Mrs. Sparsit in the coach in an ecstasy of excitement, struggling to open the door. Mrs. Sparsit, seeing them at the same moment, called them to stop. "It's a coincidence!" exclaimed Mrs. Sparsit as she was released by the coachman. "It's a providence! Come out, ma'am!" Then said Mrs. Sparsit to someone inside, "Come out, or we'll have you dragged out." Hereupon no other than the mysterious old woman descended, whom Mrs. Sparsit incontinently collared. "Leave her alone, everybody!" cried Mrs. Sparsit with great energy. "Let nobody touch her. She belongs to me. Come in, ma'am." Then said Mrs. Sparsit, reversing her former word of command, "Come in, ma'am, or we'll have you dragged in." The spectacle of a matron of classical deportment seizing an ancient woman by the throat and hailing her into a dwelling-house would have been under any circumstances sufficient temptation to all true English stragglers, so blessed as to witness it, to force a way into that dwelling-house and see the matter out. But when the phenomenon was enhanced by the notoriety and mystery by this time associated all over the town with the bank robbery, it would have lured the stragglers in with an irresistible attraction, though the roof had been expected to fall upon their heads. Accordingly, the chance witnesses on the ground, consisting of the busiest of the neighbours, in the number of some 25, closed in after Cissy and Rachel, as they closed in after Mrs. Sparsit and her prize, and the whole body made a disorderly irruption into Mr. Bounderby's dining-room, where the people behind lost not a moment's time in mounting on the chairs to get the better of the people in front. "Fetch Mr. Bounderby down!" cried Mrs. Sparsit. "Rachel, young woman, you know who this is?" "It's Mrs. Pegler," said Rachel. "I should think it is," cried Mrs. Sparsit, exulting. "Fetch Mr. Bounderby! Stand away, everybody!" Here old Mrs. Pegler, muffling herself up and shrinking from observation, whispered a word of entreaty. "Don't tell me," said Mrs. Sparsit aloud. "I have told you 20 times coming along that I will not leave you till I have handed you over to him myself." Mr. Bounderby now appeared, accompanied by Mr. Gradgrind and the whelp, with whom he had been holding conference upstairs. Mr. Bounderby looked more astonished than hospitable at sight of this uninvited party in his dining-room. "Why, what's the matter now?" said he. "Mrs. Sparsit, ma'am?" "Sir," explained that worthy woman. "I trust it is my good fortune to produce a person you have much desired to find. Stimulated by my wish to relieve your mind, sir, and connecting together such imperfect clues to the part of the country in which that person might be supposed to reside, as have been afforded by the young woman Rachel, fortunately now present to identify, I have had the happiness to succeed and to bring that person with me. I need not say most unwillingly on her part. It has not been, sir, without some trouble that I have effected this, but trouble in your service is to me a pleasure, and hunger, thirst, and cold a real gratification." Here Mrs. Sparsit ceased, for Mr. Bounderby's visage exhibited an extraordinary combination of all possible colours and expressions of discomfiture, as old Mrs. Pegler was disclosed to his view. "Why, what do you mean by this?" was his highly unexpected demand, in great warmth. "I ask you, what do you mean by this, Mrs. Sparsit, ma'am?" "Sir," exclaimed Mrs. Sparsit faintly. "Why don't you mind your own business, ma'am?" roared Bounderby. "How dare you go and poke your officious nose into my family affairs?" This allusion to her favourite feature overpowered Mrs. Sparsit. She sat down stiffly in a chair, as if she were frozen, and with a fixed stare at Mr. Bounderby, slowly grated her mittens against one another, as if they were frozen too. "My dear Josiah," cried Mrs. Pegler, trembling, "my darling boy, I'm not to blame. It's not my fault, Josiah. I told this lady over and over again, and I knew she was doing what would not be agreeable to you, but she would do it." "What did you let her bring you for? Couldn't you knock her cap off, or her tooth out, or scratch her, or do something or other to her?" asked Bounderby. "My own boy, she threatened me that if I resisted her I should be brought by constables, and it was better to come quietly than make that stir in such a—" Mrs. Pegler glanced timidly but proudly round the walls. "Such a fine house as this! Indeed, indeed, it is not my fault. My dear, noble, stately boy, I've always lived quiet and secret, Josiah, my dear. I've never broken the condition once. I've never said that I was your mother. I've admired you at a distance, and if I've come to town sometimes with long times between to take a proud peep at you, I've done it unbeknown, my love, and gone away again." Mr. Bounderby, with his hands in his pockets, walked in impatient mortification up and down at the side of the long dining-table, while the spectators greedily took in every syllable of Mrs. Pegler's appeal, and at each succeeding syllable became more and more round-eyed. Mr. Bounderby, still walking up and down when Mrs. Pegler had done, Mr. Gradgrind addressed that maligned old lady. "I am surprised, madam," he observed with severity, "that in your old age you have the face to claim Mr. Bounderby for your son, after your unnatural and inhuman treatment of him." "Me? Unnatural?" cried poor old Mrs. Pegler. "Me inhuman to my dear boy?" "Dear?" repeated Mr. Gradgrind. "Yes, dear in his self-made prosperity, madam, I dare say. Not very dear, however, when you deserted him in his infancy, and left him to the brutality of a drunken grandmother." "I deserted my Josiah?" cried Mrs. Pegler, clasping her hands. "Now, Lord forgive you, sir, for your wicked imaginations, and for your scandal against the memory of my poor mother, who died in my arms before Josiah was born. May you repent of it, sir, and live to know better." She was so very earnest and injured that Mr. Gradgrind, shocked by the possibility which dawned upon him, said in a gentler tone, "Do you deny, then, madam, that you left your son to be brought up in the gutter?" "Josiah in the gutter!" exclaimed Mrs. Pegler. "No such a thing, sir. Never. For shame on you. My dear boy knows, and will give you to know, that though he come of humble parents, he come of parents that loved him as dear as the best could, and never thought it hardship on themselves to pinch a bit, that he might write and cipher beautiful, and I've his books at home to show it. Aye, have I, said Mrs. Pegler with indignant pride, and my dear boy knows, and will give you to know, sir, that after his beloved father died when he was 8 years old, his mother too could pinch a bit, as it was her duty and her pleasure and her pride to do it, to help him out in life and put him prentice. And a steady lad he was, and a kind master he had to lend him a hand, and well he worked his own way forward to be rich and thriving. And I'll give you to know, sir, for this my dear boy won't, that though his mother kept but a little village shop, he never forgot her, but pensioned me on £30 a year, more than I want, for I put by out of it, only making the condition that I was to keep down in my own part, and make no boasts about him, and not trouble him. And I never have, except with looking at him once a year when he's never knowed it. And it's right, said poor old Mrs. Pegler in affectionate championship, that I should keep down in my own part, and I've no doubts that if I was here I should do a many unbefitting things, and I'm well contented, and I can keep my pride in my Josiah to myself, and I can love for love's own sake. And I'm ashamed of you, sir, said Mrs. Pegler lastly, for your slanders and suspicions, and for I never stood here before, nor never wanted to stand here when my dear son said no, and I shouldn't be here now if it hadn't been for being brought here. And for shame upon you, oh, for shame to accuse me of being a bad mother to my son, with my son standing here to tell you so different. The bystanders on and off the dining-room chairs raised a murmur of sympathy with Mrs. Pegler, and Mr. Gradgrind felt himself innocently placed in a very distressing predicament, when Mr. Bounderby, who had never ceased walking up and down, and had every moment swelled larger and larger, and grown redder and redder, stopped short. "I don't exactly know," said Mr. Bounderby, "how I come to be favoured with the attendance of the present company, but I don't inquire. When they're quite satisfied, perhaps they'll be so good as to disperse. Whether they're satisfied or not, perhaps they'll be so good as to disperse. I'm not bound to deliver a lecture on my family affairs. I've not undertaken to do it, and I'm not a-going to do it. Therefore, those who expect any explanation whatever upon that branch of the subject will be disappointed. Particularly Tom Gradgrind, and he can't know it too soon. In reference to the bank robbery, there has been a mistake made concerning my mother. If there hadn't been over-officiousness, it wouldn't have been made, and I hate over-officiousness at all times, whether or no. Good evening." Although Mr. Bounderby carried it off in these terms, holding the door open for the company to depart, there was a blustering sheepishness upon him, at once extremely crestfallen and superlatively absurd. Detected as the bully of humility, who had built his windy reputation upon lies, and in his boastfulness had put the honest truth as far away from him as if he had advanced the mean claim, there is no meaner, to tack himself onto a pedigree, he cut a most ridiculous figure. With the people filing off at the door he held, who he knew would carry what had passed to the whole town, to be given to the four winds, he could not have looked a bully more shorn and forlorn if he had had his ears cropped. Even that unlucky female, Mrs. Sparsit, fallen from her pinnacle of exultation into the slough of despond, was not in so bad a plight as that remarkable man and self-made humbug, Josiah Bounderby of Coketown. Rachel and Sissy, leaving Mrs. Pegler to occupy a bed at her son's for that night, walked together to the gate of Stone Lodge, and there parted. Mr. Gradgrind joined them before they had gone very far, and spoke with much interest of Stephen Blackpool, for whom he thought this signal failure of the suspicions against Mrs. Pegler was likely to work well. As to the whelp, throughout this scene, as on all other late occasions, he had stuck close to Bounderby. He seemed to feel that as long as Bounderby could make no discovery without his knowledge, he was so far safe. He never visited his sister, and had only seen her once since she went home, that is to say, on the night when he still stuck close to Bounderby, as already related. There was one dim, unformed fear lingering about his sister's mind, to which she never gave utterance, which surrounded the graceless and ungrateful boy with a dreadful mystery. The same dark possibility had presented itself in the same shapeless guise this very day to Sissy, when Rachel spoke of someone who would be confounded by Stephen's return, having put him out of the way. Louisa had never spoken of harbouring any suspicion of her brother in connection with the robbery. She and Sissy had held no confidence on the subject, save in that one interchange of looks when the unconscious father rested his grey head on his hand. But it was understood between them, and they both knew it. This other fear was so awful that it hovered about each of them like a ghostly shadow, neither daring to think of its being near herself, far less of its being near the other. And still the force spirit which the whelp had plucked up throve with him. If Stephen Blackpool was not the thief, let him show himself. Why didn't he? Another night. Another day and night. No Stephen Blackpool. Where was the man, and why did he not come back? End of section 19. Recording by Graham Thomsen.
Section 20 of Hard Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joseph Ugoretz. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Section 20, Book 3, Chapter 6. Chapter 6. The Starlight. The Sunday was a bright Sunday in autumn, clear and cool, when early in the morning Sissy and Rachel met to walk in the country. As Coketown cast ashes not only on its own head, but on the neighborhood's too, after the manner of those pious persons who do penance for their own sins by putting other people into sackcloth, it was customary for those who now and then thirsted for a draught of pure air, which is not absolutely the most wicked among the vanities of life, to get a few miles away by the railroad, and then begin their walk, or their lounge in the fields. Sissy and Rachel helped themselves out of the smoke by the usual means, and were put down at a station about midway between the town and Mr. Bounderby's retreat. Though the green landscape was blotted here and there with heaps of coal, it was green elsewhere, and there were trees to see, and there were larks singing, though it was Sunday, and there were pleasant scents in the air, and all was overarched by a bright blue sky. In the distance one way, Coketown showed as a black mist. In another distance, hills began to rise. In a third, there was a faint change in the light of the horizon where it shone upon the far-off sea. Under their feet, the grass was fresh. Beautiful shadows of branches flickered upon it and speckled it. Hedgerows were luxuriant. Everything was at peace. Engines at pits' mouths and lean old horses that had worn the circle of their daily labor into the ground were alike quiet. Wheels had ceased for a short space to turn, and the great wheel of earth seemed to revolve without the shocks and noises of another time. They walked on across the fields and down the shady lanes, sometimes getting over a fragment of a fence so rotten that it dropped at a touch of a foot, sometimes passing near a wreck of bricks and beams overgrown with grass, marking the site of deserted works. They followed paths and tracks, however slight. Mounds where the grass was rank and high, and where brambles, dockweed, and such-like vegetation were confusedly heaped together, they always avoided, for dismal stories were told in that country of the old pits hidden beneath such indications. The sun was high when they sat down to rest. They had seen no one, near or distant, for a long time, and the solitude remained unbroken. "It is so still here, Rachel, and the way is so untrodden, that I think we must be the first to have been here all the summer." As Sissy said it, her eyes were attracted by another of those rotten fragments of fence upon the ground. She got up to look at it. "And yet I don't know. This has not been broken very long. The wood is quite fresh where it gave way. Here are footsteps, too. Oh, Rachel!" She ran back and caught her round the neck. Rachel had already started up. "What is the matter?" I don't know. There's a hat lying in the grass." They went forward together. Rachel took it up, shaking from head to foot. She broke into a passion of tears and lamentations. "Stephen Blackpool" was written, in his own hand, on the inside. "Oh, the poor lad, the poor lad! He has been made away with. He is lying murdered here." Has the hat any blood upon it?" Sissy faltered. They were afraid to look, but they did examine it, and found no marks of violence inside or out. It had been lying there some days, for rain and dew had stained it, and the mark of its shape was on the grass where it had fallen. They looked fearfully about them, without moving, but could see nothing more. "Rachel," Sissy whispered, "I will go on a little by myself." She had unclasped her hand and was in the act of stepping forward when Rachel caught her in both arms with a scream that resounded over the wide landscape. Before them, at their very feet, was the brink of a black, ragged chasm hidden by the thick grass. They sprang back and fell upon their knees, each hiding her face upon the other's neck. "Oh, my good Lord, he's down there! Down there!" At first this and her terrific screams were all that could be got from Rachel, by any tears, by any prayers, by any representations, by any means. It was impossible to hush her, and it was deadly necessary to hold her, or she would have flung herself down the shaft. "Rachel, dear Rachel, good Rachel, for the love of heaven, not these dreadful cries! Think of Stephen, think of Stephen, think of Stephen!" By an earnest repetition of this entreaty, poured out in all the agony of such a moment, Sissy at last brought her to be silent, and to look at her with a tearless face of stone. "Rachel, Stephen may be living. You wouldn't leave him lying maimed at the bottom of this dreadful place a moment, if you could bring help to him?" "No, no, no! Don't stir from here, for his sake. Let me go and listen." She shuddered to approach the pit, but she crept towards it on her hands and knees, and called to him as loud as she could call. She listened, but no sound replied. She called again and listened. Still no answering sound. She did this 20, 30 times. She took a little clod of earth from the broken ground where he had stumbled and threw it in. She could not hear it fall. The wide prospect, so beautiful in its stillness but a few minutes ago, almost carried despair to her brave heart, as she rose and looked all round her, seeing no help. "Rachel, we must lose not a moment. We must go in different directions, seeking aid. You shall go by the way we have come, and I will go forward by the path. Tell anyone you see, and everyone, what has happened. Think of Stephen, think of Stephen." She knew by Rachel's face that she might trust her now, and after standing for a moment to see her running, wringing her hands as she ran, she turned and went upon her own search. She stopped at the hedge to tie her shawl there as the guide to the place, then threw her bonnet aside and ran as she had never run before. "Run, Sissy, run, in heaven's name. Don't stop for breath. Run, run!" Quickening herself by carrying such entreaties in her thoughts, she ran from field to field, and lane to lane, and place to place, as she had never run before, until she came to a shed by an engine house, where 2 men lay in the shade, asleep on straw. First to wake them, and next to tell them, all so wild and breathless as she was, what had brought her there, were difficulties, but they no sooner understood her than their spirits were on fire like hers. One of the men was in a drunken slumber, but on his comrade shouting to him that a man had fallen down the old hell shaft, he started out to a pool of dirty water, put his head in it, and came back sober. With these 2 men she ran to another 1/2 a mile further, and with that one to another, while they ran elsewhere. Then a horse was found, and she got another man to ride for life or death to the railroad, and send a message to Louisa, which she wrote and gave him. By this time a whole village was up, and windlasses, ropes, poles, candles, lanterns, all things necessary, were fast collecting and being brought into one place to be carried to the old hell shaft. It seemed now hours and hours since she had left the lost man lying in the grave where he had been buried alive. She could not bear to remain away from it any longer. It was like deserting him, and she hurried swiftly back, accompanied by 1/2 a dozen laborers, including the drunken man whom the news had sobered, and who was the best man of all. When they came to the old hell shaft, they found it as lonely as she had left it. The men called and listened as she had done, and examined the edge of the chasm, and settled how it had happened, and then sat down to wait until the implements they wanted should come up. Every sound of insects in the air, every stirring of the leaves, every whisper among these men made Sissy tremble, for she thought it was a cry at the bottom of the pit. But the wind blew idly over it, and no sound arose to the surface, and they sat upon the grass, waiting and waiting. After they had waited some time, straggling people who had heard of the accident began to come up. Then the real help of implements began to arrive. In the midst of this, Rachel returned, and with her party there was a surgeon who brought some wine and medicines. But the expectation among the people that the man would be found alive was very slight indeed. There being now people enough present to impede the work, the sobered man put himself at the head of the rest, or was put there by the general consent, and made a large ring round the old hell shaft, and appointed men to keep it. Besides such volunteers as were accepted to work, only Sissy and Rachel were at first permitted within this ring. But later in the day, when the message brought an express from Coketown, Mr. Gradgrind and Louisa, and Mr. Bounderby and the whelp were also there. The sun was 4 hours lower than when Sissy and Rachel had first sat down upon the grass before a means of enabling 2 men to descend securely was rigged with poles and ropes. Difficulties had arisen in the construction of this machine, simple as it was. Requisites had been found wanting, and messages had to go and to return. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the bright autumnal Sunday before a candle was sent down to try the air, while 3 or 4 rough faces stood crowded close together, attentively watching it, the man at the windlass lowering as they were told. The candle was brought up again, feebly burning, and then some water was cast in. Then the bucket was hooked on, and the sobered man and another got in with lights, giving the word, "Lower away." As the rope went out, tight and strained, and the windlass creaked, there was not a breath among the 100 or 200 men and women looking on that came as it was wont to come. The signal was given, and the windlass stopped, with abundant rope to spare. Apparently so long an interval ensued with the men at the windlass standing idle that some women shrieked that another accident had happened, but the surgeon, who held the watch, declared 5 minutes not to have elapsed yet, and sternly admonished them to keep silence. He had not well done speaking when the windlass was reversed and worked again. Practised eyes knew that it did not go as heavily as it would if both workmen had been coming up, and that only one was returning. The rope came in, tight and strained, and ring after ring was coiled upon the barrel of the windlass, and all eyes were fastened on the pit. The sobered man was brought up and leaped out briskly on the grass. There was a universal cry of "Alive or dead!" and then a deep, profound hush. When he said "Alive!" a great shout arose, and many eyes had tears in them. "But he's hurt very bad," he added, as soon as he could make himself heard again. "Where's doctor? He's hurt so very bad, sir, that we dunno how to get him up." They all consulted together and looked anxiously at the surgeon as he asked some questions and shook his head on receiving the replies. The sun was setting now, and the red light in the evening sky touched every face there and caused it to be distinctly seen in all its rapt suspense. The consultation ended in the men returning to the windlass and the pitman going down again, carrying the wine and some other small matters with him. Then the other man came up. In the meantime, under the surgeon's directions, some men brought a hurdle, on which others made a thick bed of spare clothes covered with loose straw, while he himself contrived some bandages and slings from shawls and handkerchiefs. As these were made, they were hung upon an arm of the pitman, who had last come up, with instructions how to use them, and as he stood, shown by the light he carried, leaning his powerful loose hand upon one of the poles, and sometimes glancing down the pit, and sometimes glancing around upon the people, he was not the least conspicuous figure in the scene. It was dark now, and torches were kindled. It appeared from the little this man said to those about him, which was quickly repeated all over the circle, that the lost man had fallen upon a mass of crumbled rubbish with which the pit was half choked up, and that his fall had been further broken by some jagged earth at the side. He lay upon his back with one arm doubled up under him, and according to his own belief had hardly stirred since he fell, except that he had moved his free hand to his side pocket, in which he remembered to have some bread and meat, of which he had swallowed crumbs, and had likewise scooped up a little water in it now and then. He had come straight away from his work on being written to, and had walked the whole journey, and was on his way to Mr. Bounderby's country house after dark when he fell. He was crossing that dangerous country at such a dangerous time because he was innocent of what was laid to his charge, and couldn't rest from coming the nearest way to deliver himself up. The old hell shaft, the pitman said, with a curse upon it, was worthy of its bad name to the last, for though Stephen could speak now, he believed it would soon be found to have mangled the life out of him. When all was ready, this man, still taking his last hurried charges from his comrades and the surgeon, after the windlass had begun to lower him, disappeared into the pit. The rope went out as before, the signal was made as before, and the windlass stopped. No man removed his hand from it now. Everyone waited with his grasp set and his body bent down to the work, ready to reverse and wind in. At length the signal was given, and all the ring leaned forward. For now the rope came in, tightened and strained to its utmost as it appeared, and the men turned heavily, and the windlass complained. It was scarcely endurable to look at the rope and think of its giving way. But ring after ring was coiled upon the barrel of the windlass safely, and the connecting chains appeared, and finally the bucket, with the 2 men holding on at the sides, a sight to make the head swim, and oppress the heart, and tenderly supporting between them, slung and tied within, the figure of a poor, crushed human creature. A low murmur of pity went round the throng, and the women wept aloud as this form, almost without form, was moved very slowly from its iron deliverance and laid upon the bed of straw. At first none but the surgeon went close to it. He did what he could in its adjustment on the couch, but the best that he could do was to cover it. That gently done, he called to him Rachel and Sissy, and at that time the pale, worn, patient face was seen looking up at the sky, with the broken right hand lying bare on the outside of the covering garments, as if waiting to be taken by another hand. They gave him drink, moistened his face with water, and administered some drops of cordial and wine. Though he lay quite motionless looking up at the sky, he smiled and said, "Rachel." She stooped down on the grass at his side and bent over him until her eyes were between his and the sky, for he could not so much as turn them to look at her. "Rachel, my dear." She took his hand. He smiled again and said, "Don't let it go." "Thou art in great pain, my own dear Stephen." "I have been, but not now. I have been dreadful and dree and long, my dear, but 'tis o'er now. Ah, Rachel, ah, a muddle, from first to last a muddle." The spectre of his old looks seemed to pass as he said the word. "I have fell into the pit, my dear, as have cost within the knowledge of old folk now living, hundreds and hundreds of men's lives, fathers, sons, brothers, dear to thousands and thousands, and keeping 'em for want and hunger. I have fell into a pit that have been with the fire damp crueller than battle. I ha' read on it in the public petition as ony one may read, for all the men that works in pits, in which they ha' praying and praying the lawmakers for Christ's sake not to let their work be murder to 'em, but to spare 'em for the wives and children, that they loves as well as gentlefolk loves theirs. When it were in work, it killed without need. When 'tis let alone, it kills without need. See how we die in no need, one way and another, in a muddle, every day." He faintly said it, without any anger against anyone, merely as the truth. "Thy little sister, Rachel, thou hast not forgot her. Thou art not like to forget her now, and me so nigh her. Thou know'st, poor, patient, suffering dear, how thou didst work for her, seatin' all day long in her little chair at thy winder, and how she died, young and misshapen, along a sickly air as hadn't no need to be, and along a working people's miserable homes. A muddle, all a muddle." Louisa approached him, but he could not see her, lying with his face turned up to the night sky. "If all the things that touches us, my dear, was not so muddled, I shouldn't needin' to come here. If we was not in a muddle among ourselves, I shouldn't have been, by my own fellow weavers and working brothers, so mistook. If Mr. Bounderby had ever knowed me right, if he'd ever knowed me at all, he wouldn't have took an offence with me. He wouldn't have suspected me. But look up yonder, Rachel. Look above." Following his eyes, she saw that he was gazing at a star. "It has shined upon me," he said reverently. "In my pain and trouble down below, it has shined into my mind. I ha' looking at it, and thought of thee, Rachel, till the muddle in my mind have cleared a while, above a bit, I hope. If some have been wanting in understanding me better, I, too, have been wanting in understanding to them better. When I got thy letter, I easily believing that what the young lady said and done to me, and what her brother said and done to me, was one, and that there was a wicked plot betwixt 'em. When I fell, I were in anger wi' her, and hurrying on to be as unjust to her as the others was to me. But in our judgments, like as in our doings, we mun bear and forbear. In my pain and trouble, looking up yonder, wi' it shining on me, I has seen more clear, and have made it my dying prayer that all the world may only come together more, and get a better understanding of one another, than when I were in to my own weak self. Louisa, hearing what he said, bent over him on the opposite side to Rachel, so that he could see her. "You ha' heard?" he said, after a few moments' silence. "I ha' not forgot you, lady." "Yes, Stephen, I have heard you, and your prayer is mine." "You have, father. Will you take a message to him?" "He is here," said Louisa with dread. "Shall I bring him to you?" "If you please." Louisa returned with her father. Standing hand in hand, they both looked down upon the solemn countenance. "Sir, you will clear me, and make my name good with all men. This I leave to you." Mr. Gradgrind was troubled, and asked how. "Sir," was the reply, "your son will tell you how. Ask him. I make no charges. I leave none ahind me, not a single word. I has seen and spoken with your son one night. I ask no more of you than that you clear me, and I trust to you to do it." The bearers being now ready to carry him away, and the surgeon being anxious for his removal, those who had torches or lanterns prepared to go in front of the litter. Before it was raised, and while they were arranging how to go, he said to Rachel, looking upward at the star, "Often as I come to myself and found it shining on me down there in my trouble, I thought it were the star as guided to our Saviour's home. I almost think it be the very star." They lifted him up, and he was overjoyed to find that they were about to take him in the direction whither the star seemed to him to lead. "Rachel, beloved lass, don't let go my hand. We may walk together tonight, my dear." "I will hold thy hand, and keep beside thee, Stephen, all the way. Bless thee. Will somebody be pleased to cover my face?" They carried him very gently along the fields, and down the lanes, and over the wide landscape, Rachel always holding the hand in hers. Very few whispers broke the mournful silence. It was soon a funeral procession. The star had shown him where to find the God of the poor, and through humility and sorrow and forgiveness he had gone to his Redeemer's rest. End of Chapter 6. End of Section 20. Recording by Joseph Ugoretz, Brooklyn, New York, www.mountebank.org. Section 21 of Hard Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joseph Ugoretz. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Section 21, Book 3, Chapter 7. Chapter 7. Whelp Hunting. Before the ring formed round the old hell-shaft was broken, one figure had disappeared from within it. Mr. Bounderby and his shadow had not stood near Louisa, who held her father's arm, but in a retired place by themselves. When Mr. Gradgrind was summoned to the couch, Sissy, attentive to all that had happened, slipped behind that wicked shadow, a sight in the horror of his face if there had been eyes there for any sight but one, and whispered in his ear. Without turning his head, he conferred with her a few moments and vanished. Thus the whelp had gone out of the circle before the people moved. When the father reached home, he sent a message to Mr. Bounderby's, desiring his son to come to him directly. The reply was that Mr. Bounderby, having missed him in the crowd, and seeing nothing of him since, had supposed him to be at Stone Lodge. "I believe, father," said Louisa, "he will not come back to town tonight." Mr. Gradgrind turned away, and said no more. In the morning he went down to the bank himself as soon as it was opened, and seeing his son's place empty, he had not the courage to look in at first, went back along the street to meet Mr. Bounderby on his way there, to whom he said that, for reasons he would soon explain, but entreated not then to be asked for, he had found it necessary to employ his son at a distance for a little while. Also, that he was charged with the duty of vindicating Stephen Blackpool's memory and declaring the thief. Mr. Bounderby, quite confounded, stood stock still in the street after his father-in-law had left him, swelling like an immense soap bubble without its beauty. Mr. Gradgrind went home, locked himself in his room, and kept it all that day. When Sissy and Louisa tapped at his door, he said without opening it, "Not now, my dears, in the evening." On their return in the evening, he said, "I am not able yet. Tomorrow." He ate nothing all day, and had no candle after dark, and they heard him walking to and fro late at night. But in the morning he appeared at breakfast at the usual hour, and took his usual place at the table. Aged and bent he looked, and quite bowed down, and yet he looked a wiser man and a better man than in the days when in this life he wanted nothing but facts. Before he left the room, he appointed a time for them to come to him, and so, with his grey head drooping, went away. "Dear father," said Louisa, when they kept their appointment, "you have 3 young children left. They will be different. I will be different yet, with heaven's help." She gave her hand to Sissy, as if she meant with her help too. "Your wretched brother," said Mr. Gradgrind. "Do you think he had planned this robbery, when he went with you to the lodging?" "I fear so, father." "I know he had wanted money very much, and had spent a good deal." "The poor man being about to leave the town, it came into his evil brain to cast suspicion on him?" I think it must have flashed upon him while he sat there, father, for I asked him to go there with me. The visit did not originate with him." "He had some conversation with the poor man. Did he take him aside?" "He took him out of the room. I asked him afterwards why he had done so, and he made a plausible excuse, but since last night, father, and when I remember the circumstances by its light, I'm afraid I can imagine too truly what passed between them." "Let me know," said her father, "if your thoughts present your guilty brother in the same dark view as mine." "I fear, father," hesitated Louisa, "that he must have made some representation to Stephen Blackpool, perhaps in my name, perhaps in his own, which induced him to do in good faith and honesty what he had never done before, and to wait about the bank those 2 or 3 nights before he left town." "Too plain," returned the father, "too plain." He shaded his face and remained silent for some moments. Recovering himself, he said, "And now, how is he to be found? How is he to be saved from justice? In the few hours that I can possibly allow to elapse before I publish the truth, how is he to be found by us, and only by us? £10,000 could not effect it." "Sissy has effected it, father." He raised his eyes to where she stood like a good fairy in his house, and said in a tone of softened gratitude and grateful kindness, "It is always you, my child." "We had our fears," Sissy explained, glancing at Louisa, "before yesterday, and when I saw you brought to the side of the litter last night, and heard what passed, being close to Rachel all the time, I went to him when no one saw, and said to him, 'Don't look at me. See where your father is. Escape at once for his sake and your own.' He was in a tremble before I whispered to him, and he started and trembled more then, and said, 'Where can I go? I have very little money, and I don't know who will hide me.' I thought of father's old circus. I have not forgotten where Mr. Sleary goes at this time of year, and I read of him in a paper only the other day. I told him to hurry there, and tell his name, and ask Mr. Sleary to hide him till I came. 'I'll get to him before the morning,' he said, and I saw him shrink away among the people." "Thank heaven!" exclaimed his father. "He may be got abroad yet." It was the more hopeful as the town to which Sissy had directed him was within 3 hours' journey of Liverpool, whence he could be swiftly dispatched to any part of the world. But caution being necessary in communicating with him, for there was a greater danger every moment of his being suspected now, and nobody could be sure at heart but that Mr. Bounderby himself, in a bullying vein of public zeal, might play a Roman part, it was consented that Sissy and Louisa should repair to the place in question by a circuitous course alone, and that the unhappy father, setting forth in an opposite direction, should get round to the same bourne by another and wider route. It was further agreed that he should not present himself to Mr. Sleary, lest his intention should be mistrusted, or the intelligence of his arrival should cause his son to take flight anew, but that the communication should be left to Sissy and Louisa to open, and that they should inform the cause of so much misery and disgrace, of his father's being at hand, and of the purpose for which they had come. When these arrangements had been well considered, and were fully understood by all three, it was time to begin to carry them into execution. Early in the afternoon, Mr. Gradgrind walked direct from his own house into the country, to be taken up on the line by which he was to travel, and at night the remaining two set forth upon their different course, encouraged by not seeing any face they knew. The two travelled all night, except when they were left for odd numbers of minutes at branch places, up illimitable flights of steps or down wells, which was the only variety of those branches, and early in the morning were turned out on a swamp, a mile or two from the town they sought. From this dismal spot they were rescued by a savage old postilion, who happened to be up early, kicking a horse in a fly. And so they were smuggled into the town by all the back lanes where the pigs lived, which, although not a magnificent or even savoury approach, was, as is usual in such cases, the legitimate highway. The first thing they saw on entering the town was the skeleton of Sleary's circus. The company had departed for another town more than 20 miles off, and had opened there last night. The connection between the two places was by a hilly turnpike road, and the travelling on that road was very slow. Though they took but a hasty breakfast and no rest, which it would have been in vain to seek under such anxious circumstances, it was noon before they began to find the bills of Sleary's horse riding on barns and walls, and 1 o'clock when they stopped in the market-place. A grand morning performance by the riders, commencing at that very hour, was in course of announcement by the bellmen as they set their feet upon the stones of the street. Sissy recommended that, to avoid making inquiries and attracting attention in the town, they should present themselves to pay at the door. If Mr. Sleary were taking the money, he would be sure to know her, and would proceed with discretion. If he were not, he would be sure to see them inside, and, knowing what he had done with the fugitive, would proceed with discretion still. Therefore they repaired with fluttering hearts to the well-remembered booth. The flag with the inscription "Sleary's Horse Riding" was there, and the Gothic niche was there, but Mr. Sleary was not there. Master Kidderminster, grown too maturely turfy to be received by the wildest credulity as Cupid any more, had yielded to the invincible force of circumstances and his beard, and, in the capacity of a man who made himself generally useful, presided on this occasion over the exchequer, having also a drum in reserve on which to expend his leisure moments and superfluous forces. In the extreme sharpness of his lookout for base coin, Mr. Kidderminster, so at present situated, never saw anything but money, so Sissy passed him unrecognized, and they went in. The Emperor of Japan, on a steady old white horse stenciled with black spots, was twirling 5 wash-hand basins at once, as it is the favourite recreation of that monarch to do. Sissy, though well acquainted with his royal line, had no personal knowledge of the present emperor, and his reign was peaceful. Miss Josephine Sleary, in her celebrated graceful equestrian Tyrolean flower act, was then announced by a new clown, who humorously said cauliflower act, and Mr. Sleary appeared, leading her in. Mr. Sleary had only made one cut at the clown with his long whiplash, and the clown had only said, "If you do it again, I'll throw the horse at you," when Sissy was recognized both by father and daughter. But they got through the act with great self-possession, and Mr. Sleary, saving for the first instant, conveyed no more expression into his locomotive eye than into his fixed one. The performance seemed a little long to Sissy and Louisa, particularly when it stopped to afford the clown an opportunity of telling Mr. Sleary, who said, "Indeed, sir," to all his observations in the calmest way, and with his eye on the house, about 2 legs sitting on 3 legs, looking at 1 leg, when in came 4 legs, laid hold of 1 leg, and up got 2 legs, caught hold of 3 legs, and threw him at 4 legs, who ran away with 1 leg. For, although an ingenious allegory relating to a butcher, a 3-legged stool, a dog, and a leg of mutton, this narrative consumed time, and they were in great suspense. At last, however, little fair-haired Josephine made her curtsy amid great applause, and the clown, left alone in the ring, had just warmed himself and said, "Now I'll have a turn," when Sissy was touched on the shoulder and beckoned out. She took Louisa with her, and they were received by Mr. Sleary in a very little private apartment, with Kansas sides, a grass floor, and a wooden ceiling all aslant, on which the box company stamped their approbation, as if they were coming through. "Cecilia," said Mr. Sleary, who had brandy and water at hand, "it doth me good to see you. You was always a favourite with us, and you have done us
credit since the old times, I'm sure. You must see our people, my dear, afore we speak of business, or they'll break their hearts, especially the women. Here's Josephine hath been and got married to E.W.B. Childers, and she has got a boy, and though he's only 3 years old, he sticks on to any pony you can bring against him. He's named the Little Wonder of Scholastic Equitation, and if you don't hear of that boy at Athlete's, you'll hear of him at Paris. And you recollect Kidderminster, that was thought to be rather sweet upon yourself? Well, he's married too. Married a widder, old enough to be his mother. She was tightrope, she was, and now she's nothing, on account of fat. They've got 2 children, so was strong in the fairy business and the nursery dodge. If you was to see our children in the wood, with their father and mother both a-dying on a horse, their uncle a-receiving of 'em at his worth upon a horse, themselves both a-going a-blackberrying upon a horse, and the robins a-coming in to cover 'em with leaves upon a horse, you'd say it was the completest thing as ever you set your eyes on. And you remember Emma Gordon, my dear, as was almost a mother to you? Of course you do. I needn't ask. Well, Emma, she lost her husband. He was throwed a heavy backfall off a elephant in a sort of a pagoda thing as the Sultan of the Indies, and he never got the better of it, and she married a second time, married a cheesemonger, as fell in love with her from the front, and he's a overseer and making a fortune.
These various changes Mr. Sleary, very short of breath now, related with great heartiness, and with a wonderful kind of innocence, considering what a bleary and brandy-and-watery old veteran he was. Afterwards he brought in Josephine and E.W.B. Childers, rather deeply lined in the jaws by daylight, and the Little Wonder of Scholastic Equitation, and in a word, all the company. Amazing creatures they were in Louisa's eyes, so white and pink of complexion, so scant of dress, and so demonstrative of leg. But it was very agreeable to see them crowding about Sissy, and very natural in Sissy to be unable to refrain from tears. There! Now Cecilia hath kissed all the children, and hugged all the women, and taken hands all round with all the men. Clear, every one of you, and ring in the band for the second part. As soon as they were gone, he continued in a low tone. Now, Cecilia, I don't ask to know any secrets, but I suppose I may consider this to be Miss Squire? This is his sister, yes, and to other un's daughter, that's what I mean. Hope I see you well, miss, and I hope the Squire's well? My father will be here soon, said Louisa, anxious to bring him to the point. Is my brother safe? Safe and sound, he replied. I want you just to take a peep at the ring, miss, through here. Cecilia, you know the dodges. Find a spy-hole for yourself. They each looked through a chink in the boards. That's Jack the Giant Killer. Piece of comic infant business, said Sleary. There's a property house, you see, for Jack to hide in. There's my clown with a saucepan lid and a spit for Jack's servant. And there's little Jack himself, in a splendid suit of armor. There's 2 comic black servants, twice as big as the house, to stand by it, and to bring it in and clear it, and the giant, a very expensive basket one. He ain't on yet. Now, do you see 'em all? Yes, they both said. Look at 'em again, said Sleary. Look at 'em well. You see 'em all? Very good. Now, miss, he put a form for them to sit on. I have my opinions, and the Squire, your father, hath his. I don't want to know what your brother's been up to. It's better for me not to know. All I say is, the Squire hath stood by Cecilia, and I'll stand by the Squire. Your brother is one of them black servants. Louisa uttered an exclamation, partly of distress, partly of satisfaction. It's a fact, said Sleary, and even known it, you couldn't put your finger on him. Let the Squire come. I shall keep your brother here after the performance. I can't undress him, nor yet wash his paint off. Let the Squire come here after the performance, or come here yourself after the performance, and you shall find your brother, and have the whole place to talk to him in. Never mind the looks of him, as long as he's well hid. Louisa, with many thanks, and with a lightened load,
detained Mr. Sleary no longer then. She left her love for her brother with her eyes full of tears, and she and Sissy went away until later in the afternoon. Mr. Gradgrind arrived within an hour afterwards. He too had encountered no one whom he knew, and was now sanguine with Sleary's assistance of getting his disgraced son to Liverpool in the night. As neither of the three could be his companion without almost identifying him under any disguise, he prepared a letter to a correspondent whom he could trust, beseeching him to ship the bearer off at any cost to North or South America, or any distant part of the world to which he could be the most speedily and privately dispatched. This done, they walked about, waiting for the circus to be quite vacated, not only by the audience, but by the company and by the horses. After watching it a long time, they saw Mr. Sleary bring out a chair and sit down by the side door, smoking, as if that were his signal that they might approach. "Your servant, Squire," was his cautious salutation as they passed in. "If you want me, you'll find me here. You mustn't mind your son having a comic livery on." They all three went in, and Mr. Gradgrind sat down forlorn on the clown's performing chair in the middle of the ring. On one of the back benches, remote in the subdued light and the strangeness of the place, sat the villainous whelp, sulky to the last, whom he had the misery to call his son. In a preposterous coat like a beadle's, with cuffs and flaps exaggerated to an unspeakable extent, in an immense waistcoat, knee breeches, buckled shoes, and a mad cocked hat, with nothing fitting him, and everything of coarse material, moth-eaten and full of holes, with seams in his black face, where fear and heat had started through the greasy composition daubed all over it. Anything so grimly, detestably, ridiculously shameful as the whelp in his comic livery, Mr. Gradgrind never could, by any other means, have believed in, weighable and measurable fact though it was. And one of his model children had come to this. At first the whelp would not draw any nearer, but persisted in remaining up there by himself. Yielding at length, if any concession so sullenly made can be called yielding to the entreaties of Sissy, for Louisa he disowned altogether, he came down, bench by bench, until he stood in the sawdust on the verge of the circle, as far as possible within its limits from where his father sat. "How was this done?" asked the father. "How is what done?" moodily answered the son. "This robbery," said the father, raising his voice upon the word. "I forced the safe myself overnight, and shut it up ajar before I went away. I had had the key that was found made long before. I dropped it that morning that it might be supposed to have been used. I didn't take the money all at once. I pretended to put my balance away every night, but I didn't. And now you know all about it." "If a thunderbolt had fallen on me," said the father, "it would have shocked me less than this." "I don't see why," grumbled the son. "So many people are employed in situations of trust. So many people out of so many will be dishonest. I have heard you talk 100 times of its being a law. How can I help laws? You have comforted others with such things, father. Comfort yourself." The father buried his face in his hands, and the son stood in his disgraceful grotesqueness, biting straw, his hands with the black partly worn away inside, looking like the hands of a monkey. The evening was fast closing in, and from time to time he turned the whites of his eyes restlessly and impatiently toward his father. They were the only parts of his face that showed any life or expression, the pigment upon it was so thick. "You must be got to Liverpool and sent abroad." "I suppose I must. I can't be more miserable anywhere," whimpered the whelp, "than I have been here, ever since I can remember. That's one thing." Mr. Gradgrind went to the door and returned with Sleary, to whom he submitted the question how to get this deplorable object away. "Why, I've been thinking of it, Squire. There's not much time to lose, though you must say yes or no. It's over 20 miles to the rail. There's a coach in half an hour that goes to the rail, purpose to catch the mail train. That train will take him right to Liverpool." "But look at him," groaned Mr. Gradgrind. "Will any coach—" "I don't mean that he should go in the comic livery," said Sleary. "Say the word, and I'll make a Joskin of him, out of the wardrobe, in 5 minutes." I don't understand," said Mr. Gradgrind. "A Joskin, a carter. Make up your mind quick, Squire. There'll be beer to fetch. I've never met with nothing but beer as will ever clean a comic blackamoor." Mr. Gradgrind rapidly assented. Mr. Sleary rapidly turned out from a box a smock frock, a felt hat, and other essentials. The whelp rapidly changed clothes behind a screen of baize, and Mr. Sleary rapidly brought beer, and washed him white again. "Now," said Sleary, "come along to the coat and jump up behind. I'll go with you there, and they'll suppose you one of my people. Say farewell to your family, and thop the word," with which he delicately retired. "Here is your letter," said Mr. Gradgrind. "All necessary means will be provided for you. Atone, by repentance and better conduct, for the shocking action which you have committed, and the dreadful consequences to which it has led. Give me your hand, my poor boy, and may God forgive you, as I do." The culprit was moved to a few abject tears by these words and their pathetic tone. But when Louisa opened her arms, he repulsed her afresh. "Not you. I don't want to have anything to say to you." "Oh, Tom, Tom, do we end so? After all my love?" "After all your love," he returned obdurately. "Pretty love, leaving old Bounderby to himself, and packing my best friend Mr. Harthouse off, and going home just when I was in the greatest danger. Pretty love, that! Coming out with every word about our having gone to that place, when you saw the net was gathering round me. Pretty love, that! You have regularly given me up. You never cared for me." "Tharp's the word," said Mr. Sleary at the door. They all confusedly went out, Louisa crying to him that she forgave him and loved him still, and that he would one day be sorry to have left her so, and glad to think of these her last words far away, when someone ran against them. Mr. Gradgrind and Sissy, who were both before him while his sister yet clung to his shoulder, stopped and recoiled. For there was Bitzer, out of breath, his thin lips parted, his thin nostrils distended, his white eyelashes quivering, his colourless face more colourless than ever, as if he ran himself into a white heat when other people ran themselves into a glow. There he stood, panting and heaving as if he had never stopped since the night, now long ago, when he had run them down before. "I'm sorry to interfere with your plans," said Bitzer, shaking his head, "but I can't allow myself to be done by horse-riders. I must have young Mr. Tom. He mustn't be got away by horse-riders. Here he is in a smock-frock, and I must have him." By the collar, too, it seemed, for so he took possession of him. End of section 21. Recording by Joseph Ugoretz, Brooklyn, New York. www.mountebank.org. Section 22 of Hard Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joseph Ugoretz. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Section 22, Book 3, Chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8, Philosophical. They went back into the booth, Sleary shutting the door to keep intruders out. Bitzer, still holding the paralyzed culprit by the collar, stood in the ring, blinking at his old patron through the darkness of the twilight. "Bitzer," said Mr. Gradgrind, broken down and miserably submissive to him, "have you a heart?" "The circulation, sir," returned Bitzer, smiling at the oddity of the question, "couldn't be carried on without one. No man, sir, acquainted with the facts established by Harvey relating to the circulation of the blood, can doubt that I have a heart." "Is it accessible," cried Mr. Gradgrind, "to any compassionate influence?" "It is accessible to reason, sir," returned the excellent young man, "and to nothing else." They stood looking at each other, Mr. Gradgrind's face as white as the pursuer's. "What motive, even what motive in reason, can you have for preventing the escape of this wretched youth?" said Mr. Gradgrind, and crushing his miserable father. "See his sister here. Pity us." "Sir," returned Bitzer, in a very businesslike and logical manner, "since you ask me what motive I have in reason for taking young Mr. Tom back to Coketown, it is only reasonable to let you know. I have suspected young Mr. Tom of this bank robbery from the first. I had had my eye upon him before that time, for I knew his ways. I have kept my observations to myself, but I have made them, and I have got ample proofs against him now, besides his running away, and besides his own confession, which I was just in time to overhear. I had the pleasure of watching your house yesterday morning, and following you here. I'm going to take young Mr. Tom back to Coketown, in order to deliver him over to Mr. Bounderby, Sir, I have no doubt whatever that Mr. Bounderby will then promote me to young Mr. Tom's situation, and I wish to have his situation, sir, for it will be a rise to me, and will do me good. If this is solely a question of self-interest with you, Mr. Gradgrind began. I beg your pardon for interrupting you, sir, returned Bitzer, but I am sure you know that the whole social system is a question of self-interest. What you must always appeal to is a person's self-interest. It's your only hold. We are so constituted. I was brought up in that catechism when I was very young, sir, as you are aware. What sum of money, said Mr. Gradgrind, will you set against your expected promotion? Thank you, sir, returned Bitzer, for hinting at the proposal, but I will not set any sum against it. Knowing that your clear head would propose that alternative, I have gone over the calculations in my mind, and I find that to compound a felony, even on very high terms indeed, would not be as safe and good for me as my improved prospects in the bank. Bitzer, said Mr. Gradgrind, stretching out his hands as though he would have said, see how miserable I am. Bitzer, I have but one chance left to soften you. You were many years at my school. If, in remembrance of the pains bestowed upon you there, you can persuade yourself in any degree to disregard your present interest and release my son, I entreat and pray you to give him the benefit of that remembrance. I really wonder, sir, rejoined the old pupil, in an argumentative manner, to find you taking a position so untenable. My schooling was paid for. It was a bargain, and when I came away, the bargain ended. It was a fundamental principle of the Gradgrind philosophy that everything was to be paid for. Nobody was ever on any account to give anybody anything, or to render anybody help without purchase. Gratitude was to be abolished, and the virtues springing from it were not to be. Every inch of the existence of mankind, from birth to death, was to be a bargain across a counter. And if we didn't get to heaven that way, it was not a political-economical place, and we had no business there. I don't deny, added Bitzer, that my schooling was cheap, but that comes right, sir. I was made in the cheapest market, and have to dispose of myself in the dearest. He was a little troubled here by Louisa and Sissy crying. Pray don't do that, said he. It's of no use doing that. It only worries. You seem to think that I have some animosity against young Mr. Tom, whereas I have none at all. I am only going, on the reasonable grounds I have mentioned, to take him back to Coketown. If he was to resist, I should set up the cry of, Stop, thief! But he won't resist. You may depend upon it. Mr. Sleary, who with his mouth open and his rolling eye as immovably jammed in his head as his fixed one, had listened to these doctrines with profound attention, here stepped forward. Squire, you know perfectly well, and your daughter knows perfectly well, better than you, because I said it to her, that I didn't know what your son had done, and that I didn't want to know. I said it was better not, though I only thought then that it was some skylarking. However, this young man having made it known to be a robbery of a bank, why, that's a serious thing, much too serious a thing for me to compound, as this young man hath very properly called it. Consequently, squire, you mustn't quarrel with me if I take this young man's side, and say he's right, and there's no help for it. But I tell you what I'll do, squire. I'll drive your son and this young man over to the rail, and prevent exposure here. I can't consent to do more, but I'll do that. Fresh lamentations from Louisa, and deeper affliction on Mr. Gradgrind's part, followed this desertion of them by their last friend. But Sissy glanced at him with great attention, nor did she in her own breast misunderstand him. As they were all going out again, he favoured her with one slight roll of his movable eye, desiring her to linger behind. As he locked the door, he said excitedly, The squire stood by you, Cecilia, and I'll stand by the squire. More than that, this is a precious rascal, and belongs to that blunthering cove that my people nearly pissed out a winder. It'll be a dark night. I've got a horse that'll do anything but speak. I've got a pony that'll go 15 mile an hour, with Childress driving of him. I've got a dog that'll keep man to one place 24 hours. Get a word with the young squire. Tell him when he sees our horse begin to dance, not to be afraid of being spilt, but to look out for a pony gig coming up. Tell him when he sees that gig close by to jump down, and it'll take him off at a rattling pace. If my dog lets this young man stir a peg on foot, I give him leave to go. and if my horse ever stirreth from that spot where he begins a dancing till the morning, I don't know him. Tharp's the word." The word was so sharp that in 10 minutes Mr. Childers, sauntering about the marketplace in a pair of slippers, had his cue, and Mr. Sleary's equipage was ready. It was a fine sight to behold the learned dog barking round it, and Mr. Sleary instructing him with his one practicable eye that Bitzer was the object of his particular attentions. Soon after dark they all three got in, and started, the learned dog, a formidable creature, already pinning Bitzer with his eye, and sticking close to the wheel on his side, that he might be ready for him in the event of his showing the slightest disposition to alight. The other three sat up in the inn all night in great suspense. At 8 o'clock in the morning Mr. Sleary and the dog reappeared, both in high spirits. "All right, Squire," said Mr. Sleary. "Your son may be aboard a ship by this time. Childers took him off an hour and a half after we left there last night. The horse danced the polka till he was dead beat. He would have waltzed if he hadn't been in harness. And then I gave him the word, he went to sleep comfortable. When that precious young rascal said he'd go forward afoot, the dog hung on to his neck handkerchief with all 4 legs in the air, and pulled him down and rolled him over, though he come back into the drag, and there he sat, till I turned the horse's head at 6:30 this morning." Mr. Gradgrind overwhelmed him with thanks, of course, and hinted, as delicately as he could, at a handsome remuneration in money. "I don't want money myself, Squire, but Childers is a family man, and if you was to like to offer him a £5 note, it mightn't be unacceptable. Likewise, if you was to stand a collar for the dog, or a set of bells for the horse, I should be very glad to take 'em. Brandy and water I always take." He had already called for a glass, and now called for another. "If you wouldn't think it going too far, Squire, to make a little spread for the company, at about 3 and 6 a head, not reckoning loath, it would make 'em happy." All these little tokens of his gratitude Mr. Gradgrind very willingly undertook to render, though he thought them far too slight, he said, for such a service. "Very well, Squire, then, if you'll only give a horse-riding a bespeak whenever you can, you'll more than balance the account. Now, Squire, if your daughter will excuse me, I would like one parting word with you." Louisa and Sissy withdrew into an adjoining room. Mr. Sleary, stirring and drinking his brandy and water as he stood, went on. "Squire, you don't need to be told that dogs is wonderful animals." "Their instinct," said Mr. Gradgrind, "is surprising." "Whatever you call it, and I'm blessed if I know what to call it," said Sleary, "it is astonishing. The way in which a dog'll find you, the distance he'll come." "His scent," said Mr. Gradgrind, "being so fine." "I'm blessed if I know what to call it," repeated Sleary, shaking his head. "But I have had dogs find me, Squire, in a way that made me think whether that dog hadn't gone to another dog and said, 'You don't happen to know a person of the name of Sleary, do you? Person of the name of Sleary, in the horse-riding way, stout man, game eye?' And whether that dog mightn't have said, 'Well, I can't say I know him myself, but I know a dog that I think would be likely to be acquainted with him,' and whether that dog mightn't have thought it over and said, 'Sleary, Sleary, oh yes, to be sure. A friend of mine mentioned him to me at one time. I can get you his address directly.' In consequence of my being afore the public and going about so much, you see, there must be a number of dogs acquainted with me, Squire, that I don't know." Mr. Gradgrind seemed to be quite confounded by this speculation. "Anyway," said Sleary, after putting his lips to his brandy and water, "it's 14 months ago, Squire, since we was at Chester. We was getting up our children in the wood one morning, when there come into our ring by the stage door a dog. He had travelled a long way. He was in a very bad condition. He was lame and pretty well blind. He went round to our children one after another, as if he was a-seeking for a child he knowed, and then he come to me, and throwed himself up behind, and stood on his 2 forelegs, weak as he was, and then he wagged his tail and died. Squire, that dog was Merrylegs." "Sissy's father's dog." "Cecilia's father's old dog. Now, Squire, I can take my oath, from my knowledge of that dog, that that man was dead and buried afore that dog came back to me. Josephine and Childers and me talked it over a long time, whether I should write or not, but we agreed no. There's nothing comfortable to tell. Why unsettle her mind and make her unhappy? Though whether her father basely deserted her, or whether he broke his own heart alone, rather than pull her down along with him, never will be known now. Squire, not till we know how the dogs findeth us out. She keeps the bottle that he sent her for to this hour, and she will believe in his affection to the last moment of her life, said Mr. Gradgrind. It seems to present two things to a person, don't it, Squire? Said Mr. Sleary, musing as he looked down into the depths of his brandy and water. One, that there is a love in the world, not all self-interest after all, but something very different. T'other, that it baith a way of its own of calculating or not calculating, with somehow or another is at least as hard to give a name to as the ways of the dogs is. Mr. Gradgrind looked out of window and made no reply. Mr. Sleary emptied his glass and recalled the ladies. Cecilia, my dear, kiss me, and good-bye. Miss Squire, to see you treating of her like a sister, and a sister that you trust and honor with all your heart and more, is a very pretty sight to me. I hope your brother may live to be better deserving of you, and a greater comfort to you. Squire, shake hands, first and last. Don't be cross with us poor vagabonds. People must be amused. They can't be always a-learning, nor yet they can't be always a-working. They ain't made for it. You must have us, Squire. Do the right thing, and the kind thing, too, and make the best of us, not the worst. And I never thought before, said Mr. Sleary, putting his head in at the door again to say it, that I was so much of a cackler. Chapter 9. Final. It is a dangerous thing to see anything in the sphere of a vain blusterer before the blamed blusterer sees it himself. Mr. Bounderby felt that Mrs. Sparsit had audaciously anticipated him, and presumed to be wiser than he. Inappeasably indignant with her for her triumphant discovery of Mrs. Pegler, he turned this presumption, on the part of a woman in her dependent position, over and over in his mind, until it accumulated with turning like a great snowball. At last he made the discovery that to discharge this highly connected female, to have it in his power to say, she was a woman of family, and wanted to stick to me, but I wouldn't have it, and got rid of her, would be to get the utmost possible amount of crowning glory out of the connection, and at the same time to punish Mrs. Sparsit according to her deserts. Filled fuller than ever with this great idea, Mr. Bounderby came in to lunch, and sat himself down in the dining-room of former days, where his portrait was. Mrs. Sparsit sat by the fire, with her foot in the cotton stirrup, little thinking whether she was posting. Since the Pegler affair, this gentlewoman had covered her pity for Mr. Bounderby with a veil of quiet melancholy and contrition. In virtue thereof, it had become her habit to assume a woeful look, which woeful look she now bestowed upon her patron. "What's the matter now, ma'am?" said Mr. Bounderby in a very short, rough way. "Pray, sir," returned Mrs. Sparsit, "do not bite my nose off." "Bite your nose off, ma'am?" repeated Mr. Bounderby. "Your nose?" meaning, as Mrs. Sparsit conceived, that it was too developed a nose for that purpose. After which offensive implication he cut himself a crust of bread, and threw the knife down with a noise. Mrs. Sparsit took her foot out of her stirrup, and said, "Mr. Bounderby, sir." "Well, ma'am," retorted Mr. Bounderby, "what are you staring at?" "May I ask, sir," said Mrs. Sparsit, "have you been ruffled this morning?" "Yes, ma'am." "May I inquire, sir," pursued the injured woman, "whether I am the unfortunate cause of your having lost your temper?" "Now, I'll tell you what, ma'am," said Bounderby, "I am not come here to be bullied. A female may be highly connected, but she can't be permitted to bother and badger a man in my position, and I am not going to put up with it." Mr. Bounderby felt it necessary to get on, foreseeing that if he allowed of details he would be beaten. Mrs. Sparsit first elevated, then knitted her Coriolanian eyebrows, gathered up her work into its proper basket, and rose. "Sir," said she majestically, "it is apparent to me that I am in your way at present. I will retire to my own apartment." "Allow me to open the door, ma'am." "Thank you, sir. I can do it for myself." "You had better allow me, ma'am," said Bounderby, passing her, and getting his hand upon the lock, "because I can take the opportunity of saying a word to you before you go. Mrs. Sparsit, ma'am, I rather think you are cramped here, do you know? It appears to me that under my humble roof there's hardly opening enough for a lady of your genius in other people's affairs." Mrs. Sparsit gave him a look of the darkest scorn, and said with great politeness, "Really, sir." "I have been thinking it over, you see, since the late affairs have happened, ma'am," said Bounderby, "and it appears to my poor judgment—" Oh, pray, sir," Mrs. Sparsit interposed with sprightly cheerfulness, "don't disparage your judgment. Everybody knows how unerring Mr. Bounderby's judgment is. Everybody has had proofs of it. It must be the theme of general conversation. Disparage anything in yourself but your judgment, sir," said Mrs. Sparsit, laughing. Mr. Bounderby, very red and uncomfortable, resumed, "It appears to me, ma'am, I say, that a different sort of establishment altogether would bring out a lady of your powers. Such an establishment as your relation, Lady Scadger's. Now, don't you think you might find some affairs there, ma'am, to interfere with?" "It never occurred to me before, sir," returned Mrs. Sparsit, "but now you mention it, should think it highly probable." "Then suppose you try, ma'am," said Bounderby, laying an envelope with a cheque in it in her little basket. "You can take your own time for going, ma'am, but perhaps in the meanwhile it will be more agreeable to a lady of your powers of mind to eat her meals by herself, and not to be intruded upon. I really ought to apologize to you, being only Josiah Bounderby of Coketown, for having stood in your light so long." "Pray don't name it, sir," returned Mrs. Sparsit. "If that portrait could speak, sir, but it has the advantage over the original of not possessing the power of committing itself and disgusting others, it would testify that a long period has elapsed since I first habitually addressed it as the picture of a noodle. Nothing that a noodle does can awaken surprise or indignation. The proceedings of a noodle can only inspire contempt." Thus saying, Mrs. Sparsit, with her Roman features like a medal struck to commemorate her scorn of Mr. Bounderby, surveyed him fixedly from head to foot, swept disdainfully past him, and ascended the staircase. Mr. Bounderby closed the door, and stood before the fire, projecting himself after his old explosive manner into his portrait, and into futurity. Into how much of futurity? He saw Mrs. Sparsit fighting out a daily fight at the points of all the weapons in the female armoury, with the grudging, smarting, peevish, tormenting Lady Scadgers, still laid up in bed with her mysterious leg, and gobbling her insufficient income down by about the middle of every quarter, in a mean little airless lodging, a mere closet for one, a mere crib for two. But did he see more? Did he catch any glimpse of himself, making a show of Bitzer to strangers, as the rising young man, so devoted to his master's great merits, who had won young Tom's place, and had almost captured young Tom himself, in the times when by various rascals he was spirited away? Did he see any faint reflections of his own image, making a vainglorious will, whereby 25 humbugs, past 55 years of age, each taking upon himself the name Josiah Bounderby of Coketown, should forever dine in Bounderby Hall, for ever lodge in Bounderby Buildings, for ever attend a Bounderby Chapel, for ever go to sleep under a Bounderby chaplain, for ever be supported out of a Bounderby estate, and for ever nauseate all healthy stomachs with a vast amount of Bounderby balderdash and bluster? Had he any prescience of the day, 5 years to come, when Josiah Bounderby of Coketown was to die of a fit in the Coketown street, and this same precious will was to begin its long career of quibble, plunder, false pretences, vile example, little service, and much law? Probably not. Yet the portrait was to see it all out. Here was Mr. Gradgrind on the same day, and in the same hour, sitting thoughtful in his own room. How much of futurity did he see? Did he see himself, a white-haired, decrepit man, bending his hitherto inflexible theories to appointed circumstances, making his facts and figures subservient to faith, hope, and charity, and no longer trying to grind that heavenly trio in his dusty little mills? Did he catch sight of himself, therefore much despised by his late political associates? Did he see them, in the era of its being quite settled that the national dustmen have only to do with one another, and owe no duty to an abstraction called a people, taunting the honourable gentleman with this and that, and with what not, 5 nights a week, until the small hours of the morning? Probably he had that much foreknowledge, knowing his men. Here was Louisa on the night of the same day, watching the fire as in days of yore,
though with a gentler and a humbler face. How much of the future might arise before her vision? Broadsides in the streets, signed with her father's name, exonerating the late Stephen Blackpool, weaver, from misplaced suspicion, and publishing the guilt of his own son with such extenuation as his years and temptation, he could not bring himself to add his education, might beseech, were of the present. So Stephen Blackpool's tombstone, with her father's record of his death, was almost of the present, for she knew it was to be. These things she could plainly see. But how much of the future? A working woman, christened Rachel, after a long illness once again appearing at the ringing of the factory bell, and passing to and fro at the set hours among the Coketown hands, a woman of pensive beauty, always dressed in black, but sweet-tempered and serene, and even cheerful, who of all the people in the place alone appeared to have compassion on a degraded, drunken wretch of her own sex, who was sometimes seen in the town secretly begging of her and crying to her, a woman working, ever working, but content to do it, and preferring to do it as her natural lot, until she should be too old to labor any more. Did Louisa see this? Such a thing was to be. A lonely brother, many thousands of miles away, writing on paper blotted with tears that her words had too soon come true, and that all the treasures in the world would be cheaply bartered for a sight of her dear face. At length this brother coming nearer home with hope of seeing her, and being delayed by illness, and then a letter in a strange hand saying, he died in hospital, of fever, such a day, and died in penitence and love of you, his last word being your name. Did Louisa see these things? Such things were to be. Herself again a wife, a mother, lovingly watchful of her children, ever careful that they should have a childhood of the mind no less than a childhood of the body, as knowing it to be even a more beautiful thing, and a possession, any hoarded scrap of which is a blessing, and happiness to the wisest. Did Louisa see this? Such a thing was never to be. But happy Sissy's happy children loving her, all children loving her, she, grown learned in childish lore, thinking no innocent and pretty fancy ever to be despised, trying hard to know her humbler fellow creatures, and to beautify their lives of machinery and reality with those imaginative graces and delights without which the heart of infancy will wither up, the sturdiest physical manhood will be morally stark death, and the plainest national prosperity figures can show will be the writing on the wall. She holding this course as part of no fantastic vow, or bond, or brotherhood, or sisterhood, or pledge, or covenant, or fancy dress, or fancy fare, but simply as a duty to be done. Did Louisa see these things of herself? These things were to be. Dear reader, it rests with you and me whether in our two fields of action similar things shall be or not. Let them be. We shall sit with lighter bosoms on the hearth to see the ashes of our fires turn gray and cold. End of section 22. Recording by Joseph Ugoretz, Brooklyn, New York. www.mountebank.org. End of Hard Times by Charles Dickens.